The Galactic Council was an institution that spanned thousands of systems and countless species, each with their own unique histories and perspectives, bound together by the shared goal of peace and cooperation across the stars. Their influence reached every corner of known space, and their laws governed the interactions between civilizations. For as long as anyone could remember, they had kept the peace and maintained order despite the differences between species, with a delicate hand balancing the needs and wants of various factions. The Council represented a unity that had long been the envy of many, but all of that was about to change with the arrival of a new species, a species that none had ever seen before. Humans had only recently been discovered by a deep space probe sent to explore the outer fringes of the galaxy. When the first message from Earth was received, it was met with excitement and curiosity. The humans were a relatively young species, inhabiting a small planet that orbited an unremarkable star in the distant edge of a galaxy teeming with life and advanced civilizations. They were primitive by most standards. Their technology was rudimentary. Their understanding of the universe was limited, and yet there was something about them that intrigued the members of the Council. A new species with so much potential, a blank canvas of possibility. And so a message was sent, a simple invitation to join the galactic community. The Council had extended such invitations countless times to other species, hoping to integrate them into their peaceful union. With little difficulty, most species accepted with enthusiasm, recognizing the benefits of cooperation. But when the message reached the humans, the response was not what anyone expected. Instead of gratitude or interest in joining the larger galactic family, the humans sent a cold and resolute refusal. They had no desire to participate in the Council's affairs, no interest in joining their treaties, no need for their help. They simply weren't interested. Their response was curt: no explanations, no negotiations, just a flat rejection. This was unprecedented. No species had ever turned down an offer to join the Council. No species had ever been so bold to openly dismiss the unity and stability the Council had built over millennia. The decision was not just a snub, it was an affront to everything the Council stood for. The more the Council's leaders discussed the refusal, the more questions piled up. Who were these humans? What did they want? How could a species so seemingly insignificant reject such an opportunity? It made no sense. The Council had always prided itself on its ability to bring peace to the galaxy and to unite species under a banner of mutual benefit. But now they were faced with a species that not only rejected the invitation but seemed completely uninterested in being a part of their vast network. There was no fear of the humans, no hostility, no threats, just a dispassionate refusal to engage. The Council was shaken. Their initial excitement had turned to confusion, and then to growing concern. The idea that the humans were uninterested in joining the Galactic Order was one thing, but the implications of such a refusal were something entirely different. Was this a species so independent that they would refuse all alliances, or was there something deeper lurking beneath the surface that they weren't seeing? The galaxy had never faced a challenge like this, and it was clear the Council was not prepared to handle it. The rejection of the human species echoed across the Galactic Council, leaving the room in stunned silence. The magnitude of such an act rippled through the chambers as representatives from various factions exchanged uneasy glances. There was no precedent for this, a species turning down the opportunity to join an interstellar network that had been the foundation of galactic peace for centuries. Some of the more experienced diplomats murmured among themselves, nervously shifting in their seats. Others stared at the communication screen, still unable to process the implications of what they had just witnessed. The Council had been a symbol of unity, strength, and cooperation. Now it was fractured by a simple yet utterly defiant refusal. The debate began slowly, at first with whispers and cautious inquiries, but it quickly escalated as frustration and confusion mounted. One by one, the councilors voiced their opinions. Some were bewildered, others angry, but all were equally perplexed. How could a species as primitive as humans turn down such an offer? Many representatives of the more advanced species spoke of their own experiences with young races, typically eager to join the fold. They argued that the humans must simply lack understanding or awareness of the opportunity before them. Perhaps they didn't grasp the full extent of what the Council could offer them in terms of security, technology, and resources. There was also the possibility that their leadership had simply misunderstood the message. Maybe their government was too unstable or too isolated to make rational decisions. But then the more cynical voices began to rise. Those who had spent their lives navigating the complex political landscape of the galaxy suggested darker possibilities. Perhaps the humans had hidden motives. Perhaps they were too proud or too independent to accept the idea of cooperation. Maybe they feared the influence of the Council and wanted to remain separate for reasons that could not yet be understood. There were whispers that the humans might possess advanced weaponry or capabilities beyond anything the Council had encountered before. A few even suggested they might be hiding something more sinister, some secret technology or power that they were unwilling to share with the greater galaxy. As the debate raged on, one thing became clear to the leaders of the Galactic Council. The refusal wasn't just an isolated event or a minor diplomatic snub. It was a challenge, one that could unravel the careful balance the Council had worked so hard to maintain. The stakes were higher now, because if the humans were refusing peace, it meant something else was at play, something far more complex and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The Council's role as the ultimate authority in the galaxy had always been unquestioned, but now they were faced with a species that refused to be dictated to, and the implications of that defiance were profound. A decision had to be made, and quickly representatives from various factions began to propose solutions. Some suggested a more forceful approach, sending a fleet to Earth to intimidate the humans into submission. Others advocated for continued diplomacy, more subtle measures to coax them into dialogue. But the longer the debate went on, the more it became clear that no one knew what the right course of action was in the face of this unprecedented situation. Fear began to set in. It wasn't just the rejection that unnerved them, but the complete lack of fear the humans exhibited. Their unyielding stance made them unpredictable, and that was something the Galactic Council could not afford. A new kind of tension settled over the room, one that was not about negotiation or conflict, but about understanding an unknown force that had just entered the galactic stage, a force the Council was ill-prepared to face. The Galactic Council, now mired in confusion and uncertainty, found itself at a crossroads. The refusal from the humans had ignited a firestorm of speculation, and the once strong unity of the Council began to crack. There was no consensus on what to do next. Some factions pushed for immediate action, fearing that humanity's stance could embolden other species to reject the Council's authority. Others argued that further diplomacy was necessary, that the humans' actions might be a misunderstanding or a miscommunication that could still be resolved. But as days turned to weeks and no new messages were sent, the fear that humanity was an enigma they could not control began to set in. Just as the debates seemed to hit a standstill, another transmission from Earth arrived. It wasn't an invitation to negotiate. It wasn't a plea for peace. It wasn't even a request for assistance. The message was simple, direct, and chilling in its clarity. Humans had made their decision, and they were standing firm in their refusal to join the Galactic Council. But it was the second part of the message that sent shockwaves through the counselors. In their message, the humans declared that they did not need the Council's protection, their technologies, or their unnecessary bureaucracy. They made it clear that humanity was content on its own path and would not be subject to the whims of any galactic institution. But then, with the final words, came the real bombshell, a warning. "We do not seek conflict," the message said, "but we will not bow to anyone. If you attempt to interfere with our sovereignty, we will defend it. Do not mistake our silence for weakness." The room fell eerily quiet as the meaning of those words sank in. There was no threat of violence, no show of aggression, but the implications were unmistakable. The humans were not asking for peace. They were declaring their independence and making it clear they would go to any lengths to protect it. In the wake of the message, whispers of fear began to spread among the Council's representatives. What did this mean for the galaxy? Was humanity prepared to stand against the combined might of the Council if necessary? They had shown nothing but self-assurance, and now they were sending a message that seemed to challenge the very fabric of the Galactic Council's power. This wasn't a message from a species seeking to join. It was a declaration of autonomy. What was more disturbing was the technology the humans had demonstrated. The Council had thought they had a handle on the capabilities of lesser species, especially those as young as humans. But when the humans had sent the fleet of ships into the galactic core, it became evident that their technological capabilities were far beyond what anyone had anticipated. These were not ships of a species that was just learning to master space travel. No, the technology humans possessed was sleek, advanced, and seemed capable of matching or even exceeding the Council's own fleets in certain areas. The ship's movements were precise, coordinated, almost military in their discipline. The Council had never seen anything like it from such a young species. As the fleet lingered in the galactic core, silently orbiting distant systems without so much as a word or a signal of aggression, it became evident to the Council that humanity had achieved a level of technological sophistication that was previously believed to be impossible for such an isolated race. How had they developed this advanced technology on their own without any influence from the galactic powers? How had they managed to keep it hidden for so long? The Council's fear deepened, not just because of the technology, but because of the mindset that came with it. Humanity had refused to join the Council, and now they were effectively telling the galaxy, "We can stand on our own." The Council was on the edge of panic. A species that could turn down membership in the greatest peacekeeping force in the galaxy and simultaneously make such a defiant statement could not be easily ignored. The human message hung over the Council like a dark cloud. An unknown and potentially volatile force had entered the galaxy, and no one knew how to respond. As the days stretched on, factions within the Council began to fracture. Some pushed for more diplomatic outreach, hoping that with time, humanity could be convinced to join the peaceful order. Others were growing more restless, their voices calling for a more aggressive response, fearing the humans would become a destabilizing force if left unchecked. One thing was certain, no one had any idea what humanity's next move would be, and that uncertainty was far more dangerous than any weapons or technology the humans might possess. In the weeks following humanity's firm rejection of the Galactic Council, tensions across the galaxy began to escalate. The Council, once a bastion of unity and calm, now found itself divided, its once immovable foundation cracking under the weight of the uncertainty humanity had thrust upon it. The refusal to join had left the Council in an uncomfortable limbo. They could not force humanity's participation, but they couldn't simply ignore them either. The more the Council tried to grasp at a solution, the more elusive the answers became. The Council's first response had been an emergency diplomatic envoy, a team of high-ranking ambassadors from various powerful factions. These diplomats were seasoned experts in negotiation and had experience with even the most volatile species in the galaxy. Surely, they thought, a species as seemingly simple as humans could be reasoned with. They were young, after all, just beginning to spread their influence across the stars. How could they possibly resist the advantages of joining a vast, galactic union that promised security, knowledge, and resources? The envoys arrived on Earth in a sleek fleet of ships, their intentions peaceful and their demeanor open. They were prepared for anything, or so they believed. What they did not anticipate was the human response. Rather than engaging in diplomatic pleasantries or offering a counter-proposal, the human government reiterated their previous stance with cold finality. The humans did not need or want the Council. They were fine as they were. They had their own path to follow. And that path did not involve submitting to the rule of an intergalactic body, no matter how well-intentioned it was. The envoys, baffled by the unwavering determination of the humans, pressed on with offers of aid, technology, and a guaranteed seat at the table of galactic power. They painted vivid pictures of the prosperity that awaited humanity if they would only join the ranks of the Council, but it was like speaking to a brick wall. The humans politely declined every offer, their leadership composed and resolute, unwavering in their position. What was most frustrating, however, was that there seemed to be no reason behind it. The humans had no obvious agenda. no immediate threat from other factions that might explain their defiance. They weren't engaged in war, and they didn't seem to be preparing for one. They simply didn't want to be a part of something larger than themselves. The diplomats left Earth, defeated and confused, their messages ignored, their offers unheeded. Back in the council chambers, this diplomatic failure only deepened the sense of dread that had been growing since humanity's initial rejection. How could a species so young, so seemingly fragile, be so resistant to the idea of unity? The fear now was that the humans might be underestimating the weight of their decision. The council was not just a political entity, it was a force that kept peace across the galaxy. Every species had agreed to work together in the interest of mutual prosperity and security. To reject that was to reject the very foundation of galactic order. As debates raged on, some members of the council began to question whether the humans could be trusted to remain neutral. If they rejected the council so strongly, what would stop them from starting a new faction of their own? A faction with advanced technology and a seemingly unshakable resolve. The fear was that humanity's desire for independence could lead them to destabilize the galaxy, to shatter the delicate peace that the council had spent millennia building. Tensions soon spilled out of the council chambers and into the outer sectors. Smaller planetary systems and less powerful species, who had always looked to the Galactic Council for guidance, began to watch humanity's refusal with a mixture of admiration and fear. Some were emboldened by the humans' defiance, seeing it as a sign of strength and independence. Others, however, were unsettled. What would humanity do next? Would they try to pull other species away from the Council, or worse, challenge its authority directly? The Galactic Council was now at a critical juncture. Should they attempt further diplomatic outreach, hoping that with time humanity would see reason, or should they prepare for the possibility that humanity's defiance might mark the beginning of a new era, one where the Galactic Council no longer held the unquestioned power it once had? The pressure mounted, and the clock ticked down. Soon, they would have to make a decision that could reshape the fate of the galaxy forever. As weeks passed without any significant change in humanity's stance, the mood within the Galactic Council grew increasingly tense. The failure of the diplomatic envoy had left the Council with a difficult choice: to continue pursuing negotiations or to prepare for a potential confrontation. The longer humanity remained defiant, the more uneasy the Council's factions became. The more moderate members still believed that dialogue could resolve the situation, that humanity simply needed time to come around to the idea of joining the greater galactic order. But others, especially the more hawkish factions, began to voice their concerns with increasing fervor. A particularly vocal group of counselors from the more militaristic species called for immediate action. They argued that humanity's refusal was not just an isolated decision. It was a declaration of sovereignty, and it could inspire others to question the Council's authority. If humanity could reject the offer to join the galactic fold, what was to stop other races from doing the same? What would that mean for the future of the Council and the stability it had long provided? In their eyes, allowing humanity to continue their isolationist path could lead to the fracturing of the Council itself. The fear of an independent human faction, possibly rallying other like-minded species, was a threat they couldn't ignore. These factions began pushing for a more aggressive stance, either through sanctions or, in the most extreme cases, military action. The idea was to show humanity the price of defying the galactic order, to force them into submission before they became too powerful or influential. But there were those who hesitated, who questioned whether such drastic measures were necessary. After all, humanity had made it clear that they weren't interested in conflict. They simply wanted to remain free of the Council's reach. A few voices within the Council suggested that patience was the key, that humanity would eventually come to understand the benefits of joining, if given more time. The debate raged on for days, with no resolution in sight. Meanwhile, the humans seemed indifferent to the growing panic within the Council. Their position had not wavered. They continued to assert their autonomy, reinforcing their message with subtle yet deliberate actions. More ships were launched into space, not as a show of force, but as a demonstration of their growing reach and independence. The humans were exploring the galaxy on their own terms, charting unknown systems, and interacting with species they chose to engage with, all without the Council's involvement. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the growing number of smaller species, those on the fringe of galactic power, who were starting to take notice. Some had long been dissatisfied with the Council's policies, feeling that their voices were drowned out by the larger, more dominant factions. Now many of them saw humanity's refusal as an example of what was possible. There was a rising sense of solidarity among these planets, a quiet undercurrent of rebellion against the established order. If humanity could reject the Council's influence, why couldn't they? A movement began to take shape, small at first, but growing by the day. Discontented species, those who had long been ignored or marginalized by the Council, were beginning to form unofficial alliances with humanity. These species admired the humans' resolve, and they too began to question the legitimacy of the Council's rule. Whether out of a desire for independence or simply the belief that the current galactic order was flawed, this newfound unity among the smaller species began to send a ripple of unease through the larger factions of the Council. The situation was becoming more complicated by the day. The Council, once a unified front, was now divided between those who feared humanity's growing influence and those who wished to avoid conflict at all costs. Some argued that humanity's example could inspire a new era of self-determination for other races, breaking down the hierarchical structure that had existed for so long. Others feared that the spark of rebellion might lead to a much larger fire, one that would threaten not only the Council's power, but the fragile peace that had held the galaxy together for millennia. In the end, the Council realized that they could no longer ignore the challenge humanity posed. It was no longer just about diplomacy or rejection. It was about a fundamental shift in how the galaxy saw itself. Humanity, whether intentionally or not, had set the stage for a new era of galactic politics. And as the Council scrambled to figure out how to respond, it became clear that this was no longer just a matter of persuasion. The future of the galaxy was being shaped by forces far beyond the Council's control. The question was no longer whether humanity would join, but whether the Council could continue to maintain its dominance in a galaxy that was rapidly changing. As the crisis deepened, the Galactic Council found itself in a precarious position. The debates over how to deal with humanity had become increasingly polarized. The moderate factions, still hopeful that a peaceful solution could be reached, pushed for continued diplomacy. They believed that patience and a few well-placed concessions could bring humanity around. Perhaps they had simply misunderstood the intricacies of galactic politics, or perhaps they needed time to see the broader picture. But their voices were growing quieter, drowned out by the rising tide of more extreme views. The aggressive factions, led by those who believed in the Council's unchallenged authority, now had the upper hand. They argued that the Council's legitimacy could no longer be taken for granted if humanity was allowed to stand apart. One influential speaker, an ambassador from a warlike species with a long history of dominating weaker races, laid out a bold proposal. The time for diplomacy was over, they said. Humanity's refusal to join the Council was not merely a rejection. It was a direct challenge to the status quo. The ambassador proposed a forceful response. The deployment of a military fleet to Earth, with the goal of reminding the humans of the Council's power. The fleet would not engage in an all-out attack, but would serve as a warning. A message that humanity's defiance could not go unpunished. This line of thinking gained traction among several powerful factions, especially those with the most to lose from a fractured galaxy. The idea of using force, however measured, to bring humanity into line seemed like the only viable solution. Yet, as the proposal gained support, there were still dissenting voices. One of the more vocal counselors, a representative of a species known for its wisdom and commitment to diplomacy, stood firm in opposition. A military response, they argued, would be a catastrophic mistake. Humanity had made it clear they were not interested in conflict. Pushing them into a corner, especially when they had shown no signs of aggression, would only ensure that their defiance hardened into something more dangerous. It would also set a dangerous precedent for the galaxy. If the Council resorted to force in this case, what would stop them from doing the same to other species in the future? Such an action could destabilize the fragile alliances between the Council's members and incite uprisings on multiple fronts. If humanity was allowed to become a symbol of resistance, it could spark a larger rebellion, one that might fracture the Council beyond repair. While the debate raged within the Council chambers, outside, in the reaches of the galaxy, the situation was becoming more chaotic. The smaller factions that had rallied to humanity's side were now beginning to form unofficial alliances, offering support in the form of trade, information, and even military resources. It was a quiet rebellion, but it was growing. The idea of a new independent coalition outside the reach of the Council was starting to take root, with humanity at its core. This new alliance wasn't necessarily bent on war, but it was united by a shared desire for autonomy. The Council's influence was waning, and it was becoming more apparent that humanity's rejection was the spark that could ignite a larger movement for independence. Meanwhile, humanity itself remained largely silent, its government steadfast in its refusal to bow to the Council. While some within the Council worried that this silence indicated a hidden agenda, perhaps humanity was preparing for war, or secretly developing weapons that could rival the Council's. Others began to wonder if it wasn't a sign of something else entirely. The humans were not showing weakness. They were showing control. They had made their stance clear, and they were letting the Council make the first move. In their silence, humanity was forcing the galaxy to confront a new reality, one in which not all species would bend to the will of the powerful few. The Council had reached a tipping point. A response had to be made. Some argued that it was time for direct action, to squash the seeds of rebellion before they could take root. Others believed that the window for peaceful resolution had not yet closed, and that the humans could still be persuaded, or at the very least contained. But the longer the Council waited, the greater the risk that they would lose control of the situation. Humanity's stance had changed the galactic balance, and the Council's once unified front was now fragmented, uncertain, and divided. No one knew what the next move would be, but one thing was clear. The galaxy had entered uncharted territory. The future was no longer in the hands of the Council alone. The question was no longer whether humanity would join. The question was whether the Council could maintain its dominance in a galaxy it was beginning to shift beneath its feet. The time for deliberation within the Galactic Council was rapidly running out. As tensions escalated, the Council was now fractured into two distinct factions, those advocating for a more measured diplomatic approach, and those who believed only a demonstration of power could curb humanity's growing defiance. The question of whether to respond with force had divided the councilors, and with each passing day, the gap between them widened. Those who favored a hardline approach argued that humanity's continued rejection was a direct challenge to the Council's authority, one that could not be ignored without risking further destabilization of the galaxy. They had watched as humanity's influence spread, seemingly unchallenged, and the growing alliance of smaller species that had begun to coalesce around them only further confirmed their fears. For these councilors, the idea of allowing humanity to remain outside the Council's reach was unthinkable. If the Council could not maintain its dominance, what would prevent other species from following humanity's example? What would stop entire star systems from breaking away and rejecting the peace that had been painstakingly built over millennia? The idea of an independent faction led by humanity was one they could not tolerate. They argued that if they did not act now, they would soon find themselves facing a galaxy divided into competing coalitions, each vying for power, resources, and influence. If humanity refused to join peacefully, then force was the only option. Meanwhile, the more diplomatic faction, though still in the minority, continued to advocate for patience and negotiation. They understood the growing unrest among the smaller factions, but they insisted that any military action would only play into humanity's hands. It would provoke a response, perhaps even escalate into a full-blown war. The Council's power was not absolute, they warned. It depended on the support of its members, and the more aggressive factions were alienating those whose loyalty could be swayed by the promise of autonomy. But diplomatic solution, however difficult, was still possible. Humanity had made it clear that they did not seek conflict. They simply wanted independence. There had to be a way to work with them, to show them that the Council's offers were not a form of control, but an opportunity for growth and security. But as time passed, the fear of inaction began to creep into the minds of even the most stalwart diplomats. Humanity's silence, their insistence on standing apart from the Galactic Order, was beginning to be seen as a threat in itself. Every day that passed without a clear resolution felt like a ticking time bomb. The smaller factions, emboldened by humanity's defiance, were now actively considering joining their cause. Some had already begun to openly defy the Council's mandates, pushing the boundaries of what had once been seen as unquestionable authority. The very fabric of the Council's unity was starting to tear apart, and no one knew where it would end. One final, fateful meeting was convened, one that would decide the future of the galaxy. The room was filled with the most influential representatives of the Council, each a towering figure in their own right, each with their own agenda and their own fears. They knew the stakes were higher than ever before. If they did not act decisively, the unity they had worked so hard to preserve for centuries would collapse. The question was no longer whether humanity would join. The question was whether the Council could survive without them. A proposal was put forward by the most radical factions: the deployment of a massive fleet to Earth. The fleet would arrive as a show of strength, a message that the Council would not allow any species to stand apart without consequences. It would not be an invasion, but it would be a demonstration of both the Council's power and its resolve. The fleet would orbit Earth for a period of time, making its presence known, while the human leaders would be given a final ultimatum: join the Council or face the consequences. The proposal was met with support from the more hawkish factions, but it was also met with fierce opposition from the diplomatic bloc. They warned that such an act would push humanity into a corner, forcing them into a position where they would have no choice but to fight back. The costs of war, especially against a species with unknown capabilities, could be catastrophic. And if humanity responded with force, the repercussions would ripple throughout the galaxy, potentially causing the kind of war the Council had worked so hard to avoid. For hours, the Council deliberated, weighing the risks and rewards of each path. It became clear that no matter what decision was made, the galaxy would never be the same. The Council's power, once unquestioned, had been shaken. But how much further could they push before humanity, an unknown and seemingly invincible force, decided to make their stand? The meeting ended in chaos, with no resolution reached. The debate would continue, but the forces of division within the Council had become too strong to ignore. The galaxy was on the precipice of a new era, and no one could predict what would come next. It came not through unity, but by sheer force of circumstance. As the factions within the Council splintered further, unable to agree on any diplomatic course of action, the hawkish elements pushed for a resolution to be finalized without delay. They believed the time for dialogue had passed, that humanity's refusal to join the Galactic Order was not just a diplomatic inconvenience, but an existential threat to the very structure of the galaxy. They couldn't afford any more hesitation. A fleet, massive and imposing, was dispatched to Earth. The intention was clear. Humanity would either submit to the Council's terms, or they would be forced to face the consequences of their defiance. But as the fleet moved into position, en route to Earth's system, something unexpected occurred, something that no one had foreseen. The humans did not panic. They did not make any desperate moves or attempt to flee. Instead, they simply continued with their own activities, as if the approaching fleet was nothing more than an inconvenient disturbance. It was a chilling display of their resolve. For weeks, Earth's communications had been deliberately neutral. the humans maintaining their stance of complete independence. But now, with the fleet nearing, there was a strange calm. It was almost as if the humans had anticipated this moment from the beginning and had prepared accordingly. The Galactic Council, watching this from their command centers, began to realize just how little they knew about humanity's true capabilities. The humans weren't simply rejecting them. They were making a statement that none of the Council's species had ever dared to make. They were unbowed, unmoved by the very might that had kept the galaxy under control for centuries. For the first time in a long while, the Council felt the creeping weight of their own uncertainty. Then, just as the fleet reached Earth's orbit, an unexpected message arrived. This time, not from the humans themselves, but from an unexpected source. A group of smaller, previously unaligned factions who had quietly watched humanity's rise with admiration now sent a transmission to the Council. They had seen the military buildup, the ultimatum, and they knew exactly what it meant. And they were not afraid. The message was clear. If humanity is forced to bend, so will we. You will not dictate the fate of our future. The Council's diplomats, who had long been silent, now found themselves caught in the crossfire of a galactic revolution they hadn't seen coming. The smaller factions, inspired by humanity's refusal to be controlled, were now openly aligning themselves with the human cause. What had once been a single, isolated defiance had sparked something much larger, a movement for autonomy and independence that now spread across the galaxy. Back on Earth, the humans had made their own preparations. They were not actively preparing for war, but they had not been idle either. Their technology, once seen as primitive in comparison to the Council's advanced fleets, had evolved in ways that the Council had grossly underestimated. Humanity had quietly developed new forms of defense. Defense not based on the overwhelming strength of their ships, but on something far more subtle. Their fleet, small but highly maneuverable, was equipped with technology that allowed them to disrupt even the most advanced systems in the galaxy. As the Council fleet entered Earth's orbit, it was met not with a destructive barrage, but with an electronic pulse that temporarily disabled their ship systems. The fleet halted in place, their once unified movements thrown into disarray. It was a warning shot, a message from humanity that said, "We will not be pushed." The Council, now staring at a fleet they could neither control nor easily overcome, faced the undeniable truth. Humanity was not just a threat. They were the vanguard of a new future, a future in which the established order of the Council no longer held sway. The galaxy was changing, and the humans were its harbingers. The defiance they had shown had not only challenged the Galactic Council, it had awakened a movement among the galaxy's smaller, disillusioned species who had long believed they would never have a voice. Now they did. The Council was no longer in control. The balance of power had shifted irreparably. And as the fleet of smaller factions, now allied with humanity, appeared on the edge of the Council's territory, the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the next move. The question was no longer whether humanity would join the Council. The question now was whether the Council would survive in a galaxy where unity was no longer assured, where independence and self-determination were no longer ideals, but realities. And in the heart of Earth's orbit, humanity watched, unwavering and resolute, knowing that this was only the beginning.